series bombshell newsmaker interviews and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
And welcome once again to On the Money. It's your daily weekday dose of economics, business and consumer news. I'm Liam Halligan, and for the next hour, we'll be talking about wages, prices and the cost of living, about Amazon's decision to not block visa payments. Plus, we meet a young woman who helps her fellow millennials hack their way through the jungle of financial confusion. All that and more on The Money, after the GB News headlines with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon, it's 1 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright to get you up to date here on GB News. The Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, says claims Boris Johnson lied to Parliament are nonsense. The Prime Minister's former chief advisor, though, Dominic Cummings, says he was prepared to swear under oath that Boris Johnson lied to MPs when he said he'd not known beforehand about the number 10 garden drinks in May 2020. Labour's Shadow Work and Pension Secretary Jonathan Ashworth says Tory MPs are backing the Prime Minister due to personal rather than national interests.
The question for Conservative MPs is, why are they putting up with this? I'll tell you why they're putting up with this. Because they're weighing up what they think is in their electoral interests, whether they should stick with this guy or get rid of him because of how that will impact on the next election. They should be making a decision in what is the national interest. Winston Churchill said country comes first, not political party. Tory MPs should have that in their mind today.
In light of the party allegations, here at GB News, we conducted an exclusive poll which reveals that over 2/3 of voters believe Boris Johnson has not told the truth about parties in Downing Street. 83% of Brits also believe the Prime Minister has clearly broken the government's own lockdown rules. And over 40% of voters no longer feel any obligation to obey lockdown restrictions if they were reintroduced. In other news now, huge crowds have gathered for the funeral of primary school teacher Aisling Murphy in County Offaly in Ireland. Her pupils lined the streets holding instruments and photographs of her primary school teacher. The Irish Taoiseach Micheál Martin and President Michael D. Higgins are both in attendance. The 23-year-old was killed while running along the Grand Canal in Tullamore. Magistrates are going to be given more sentencing powers in an attempt to reduce the backlog of criminal cases that built up during the pandemic. Magistrates will now be able to sentence more serious cases that would previously have gone to the Crown Court, such as fraud, theft and assault. They'll also be able to give jail terms of up to a year, which is double the current maximum of 6 months. Some critics, though, have said this is a sticking plaster solution. The House of Lords has voted against government plans to clamp down on noisy protests. Crossbench peer Lord Coville tabled an amendment to the new crime bill, arguing the original legislation could prohibit large, peaceful and well-organised demonstrations from taking place. The amendment would ensure, for example, that there isn't a ban on loud protests in Parliament Square. The Prime Minister has warned President Vladimir Putin must not be allowed to rewrite the rules over Ukraine amid continued tensions. It comes as Britain is supplying further self-defence weapons to Ukraine over concerns about a possible Russian invasion. The UK Defence Secretary Ben Wallace says a small number of personnel will also provide training to Ukrainian forces, but stressed British troops will not be deployed to fight Russians. Russia has amassed 100,000 soldiers, as well as tanks, rocket artillery and short-range ballistic missiles at their border with Ukraine. A union has called for government intervention after an oil company demanded its workers a jab before returning to any of its UK offshore platforms. Canadian Natural Resources International, which has offices in Aberdeen, is believed to be the first of any offshore contractor to introduce the mandatory vaccine policy, with exceptions for workers with medical or religious reasons. Unite is looking at legal action against any company seeking to pursue a jab or job policy. The number of employees on payroll grew in December, but average pay fell in November for more than the first time in more than a year. The Office for National Statistics says the numbers of UK employees rose by 0.6% in December to nearly 30 million. Figures also reveal that in the 3 months up to November, the unemployment rate fell back to almost where it was pre-pandemic. A New Zealand Navy ship has departed for Tonga with aid on board. It's after an underwater volcano erupted and triggered a 10-metre tsunami on Saturday. New Zealand's military was unable to fly essential supplies to Tonga as its airport runway is covered in thick ash. British #1 star Emma Raducanu has won her first round Australian Open match in 3 sets. The 19-year-old tennis star beat America's Sloane Stephens and fought back from losing the second set 6-2 to win the third set. You're up to date here on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB Plus radio. I'll keep you up to date across the afternoon. Now, On the Money and Liam.
And this is On the Money. Coming up, as wages rise but not as fast as inflation, we tackle the squeeze on living standards. How should the government tackle our cost of living crisis? Plus, Amazon halts plans to block UK Visa credit card payments. What's behind the tech giant's change of heart? And today's Money Talks interview is with the musician turned financial journalist Iona Bain. She'll be discussing how stolen gig earnings inspired her career change and why she's on a mission to help young adults, her fellow millennials, manage their personal finances. That's later in the show. And as ever, I want your questions, opinions, ideas. What do you think of the issues raised in today's On the Money? Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet @gbnews. Stay with us. This is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan. You're On the Money. Now, Britain's job market's booming. Wages are rising and there are record job vacancies too, according to new official data published this morning. At the same time, though, the cost of living is surging as inflation and related price pressures combine with spiralling fuel bills and incoming tax rises. The UK economy is growing. We've avoided the unemployment spike some said lockdown would bring. But if the broad population is to feel better off, wage rises need to outpace our spiralling cost of living. And that doesn't seem to be happening. There's no doubt the jobs market is strong. Employment is now above pre-COVID levels across the UK, with the number of payrolled staff hitting 29.5 million last month. That's 500,000 more than in February 2020, prior to the pandemic. Plus, there are 1.2 million job vacancies, a new record. Having said all that, though, wage growth is slowing and, crucially, lagging behind inflation. Weekly earnings during September, October and November were 4.2% higher than the same month in 2020, a pretty sharp rise. But, because the latest inflation figures show the Consumer Price Index CPI 5.1% higher in November than the same month the previous year, wages on average are rising by less than prices. And that means actual living standards are falling. In real terms, then, that is after inflation, wages are going down. On top of that, a raft of pre-announced tax rises is set to kick in this April. Plus, fuel bills will be rising sharply in April too. And as the highly respected Joseph Rowntree Foundation has reported today, some of our poorest households will soon be spending more than half their income on energy. That's why On the Money's been campaigning to scrap the VAT, highlighting the case for removing VAT on domestic fuel bills. That's entirely within the gift of the UK government now we've left the European Union. So today's data shows wages are already rising less than inflation, and that's before more fuel price rises and higher taxes. Plus, many of those 1.2 million job vacancies Well, they'll be in places a long way from where the unemployed live, and available workers may not have the necessary experience or skills. And there's something else, another cost of living increase, which today's strong labour market makes more likely, and that's an interest rate rise next month. And that's our On the Money question today. At a time when, despite rising wages, living standards are falling, we're asking, how can the government tackle this cost of living crisis? As always here on The Money, grown-up discussions with people who really know their stuff. Joining me, Scott Benton, Conservative MP for Blackpool South. Welcome back on the show. Helen Barnard, Deputy Director for the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. Welcome back to you too, Helen. And in the studio, friend of the show, Head of Investment at Interactive Investor, it's Victoria Scholar. Good to see you, Victoria, as ever. Helen, let's go to you first. I mentioned in my opening there that the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, as we've been doing here on The Money for many weeks now, is really focused on this cost of living crisis, focused on these incoming fuel bill increases that will come in April. Tell us a bit more about your concern.
So I think my main concern is about people who are on low incomes. So I think in some ways it's slightly misleading to say that the whole country is about to hit a crisis. We're all going to have bills going up, but it's going to be a crisis for people who will be left unable to cover the basics as a result. So our analysis shows that if you're in a low income household, you're going to end up spending around a fifth of your income on energy bills. But as you said, for some groups, for single parents, it's a quarter of your income. For some groups, it goes up to more than a half. Whereas for people in kind of middle income households, your bills will go up, but you'll still only be spending 6 to 8% of your income paying those energy bills. You will have plenty left over for everything else. Whereas what we're hearing are people who are saying already, my kids are cold, but I can't afford to put the heating on. We're having to cut back on food. We're getting behind with bills. So it's those people we need to target extra support at rather than something very broad that would give a bit to everybody and not really get at the heart of the problem.
In fairness, Helen, it's always good to have you and the Joseph Rowntree Foundation here on The Money, hugely respected organisation. But you don't think that should be scrapped. You think there should be other ways to be found to ease that burden of fuel bills, don't you, in fairness?
I do, yeah. So the thing about a VAT cut, it's an obvious thing to do. It goes straight to the right bill. The trouble is a VAT cut would save maybe £100 off a bill. Now, if you're somebody whose bill has just gone up by £600, and if you are several £100 away from being able to cover your costs, that £100 is not going to touch the sides of what's going on for you. Whereas if you're in a middle income household, £100 is very nice, but you don't actually really need it. And it's very expensive. What is it, £2.5 billion? That is a lot of public money to spend to not really solve the problem. Whereas if we target help to those people on low incomes, and we have a very well-designed benefit system that lets us do that, we can really ease the burden for the people who are suffering serious hardship. And actually, more broadly, there are things we can do like spread the cost of supplier failures over 3 years, which will ease the burden for everybody a bit, but without costing billions in public money, which is what the VAT cut would take.
It's the age-old tension, isn't it, between trying to target assistance on particular parts of society in a situation where it's sometimes hard to do the means testing and so on that you need to do that. But completely accept your points and well made. Let's go to you, Scott Benton. You're the Conservative MP for Blackpool South. That's one of those red wall seats, if you like, a traditional Labour seat that the Tories took in 2019. To what extent is the cost of living crisis that we discuss so often here on The Money impacting your constituents? To what extent do you think addressing it will be seen to be vital if you are going to regain your seat, frankly?
Hi, Liam. My constituency is probably the most deprived in the whole of England. So when we speak about a so-called cost of living crisis, this isn't a new concept for my constituents. People have been struggling for the last 12, 24 months throughout the pandemic. with the cost of buying essentials. Clearly, when we have consumer goods and food increasing above the rate of wages, expected increases in council tax, national insurance and energy as well, if we're not careful, we have a perfect storm for many of my constituents who are in full-time work, but who may well struggle to heat the house and pay for essentials going forward. So the government really do need to listen. This is going to be a huge issue affecting seats in the north of England and the Midlands, particularly the so-called red wall, over the next 12 months or potentially even longer, depending on how inflation is affected as we reopen society. So the government do need to listen. I've had meetings with the Chancellor, and I know particularly on the cost of fuel, the government are examining different options. And as Helen said, particularly perhaps a targeted support measure for low-income families to help with the cost of fuel. But people will be concerned ahead of those bills increasing in April, and we need answers sooner or later.
Victoria, great to have you back in the studio. You're very much a City of London animal. You're from Interactive Investor. As we heard there, decent, reasonable people can disagree on how we should tackle these fuel bills. But with Ofgem, the regulator, about to announce a higher domestic price cap on the 7th of April to come in, on the 7th of February, my apologies, to come in April, it really is all about fuel bills, isn't it, at the moment?
Yeah, and this is one of the key contributors to inflation at the moment, which stands at around 5% and looks set to rise further. When I look,
We've got the number out tomorrow, haven't we, I think?
Yes, tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. But when I checked this morning, we saw that British wholesale gas prices surged as much as 7% just today. WTI, which is the US benchmark for oil, up 2%. It's already had a big rally at the start of the year. So we're seeing huge inflation in commodity prices, and that is affecting all parts of society and the economy in terms of this potential cost of living crisis, which is looking quite scary. And we've also had those unemployment figures, and the labour market should be favourable to workers because we're seeing low unemployment, we're seeing high vacancies, we're seeing low redundancies. All this should play into the hands of workers to allow them to bid for higher wages and bonuses. But unfortunately, because of the inflationary backdrop, even though they are able to get higher wages, it's not enough to offset those bills and the just general cost of living.
A 3.8% annual wage rise is chunky, right, when you look at the numbers, but it's outpaced by 5.1% inflation and more to come. So in real terms, cost of living is going up, living standards are falling.
Yeah, and we're seeing a really interesting mix in the labour market in terms of different opportunities arising, such as from Brexit. We're seeing job opportunities in imports and customs. And there's been all sorts of changes like as a result of the pandemic, because of the rise of e-commerce. That's meant that transport and logistics has become a lot more in demand. So there's a real opportunity for workers. It's just that we need to get those price levels under control first.
Helen, back to you. Joseph Rowntree Foundation has, of course, got a long, distinguished track record of campaigning, anti-poverty measures and so on. I'd say the cost of living crisis at the moment in politics is second only to sort of Downing Street Partygate scandals and all the gossip about that. But it strikes me that as higher inflation numbers come out, as these fuel price increases kick in, it's really going to burst through and become the most important issue in our domestic politics. Do you agree?
Absolutely, and I think it's right that it should. I mean, this is going to be what people up and down the country are facing this year. I think the challenge is going to be to, in a sense, square the politics with good policy. So we've got this incredibly febrile political atmosphere that makes it very hard to make good policy and drive it through. And also some of the measures that appeal to people politically, like the VAT cut, which obviously you're campaigning for, the Labour Party has asked for, it's very popular, but I don't think is a very good policy response. I think that the trick is going to be, can we get really good policy responses to the immediate crisis, but also look at some of the underlying drivers. You know, this is not an unexpected sudden event. I think as your MP was saying, there are people for whom they are always on the brink of a cost of living crisis because their incomes are so low consistently. And we need to change that. We need to change it so people have resilience, so they can cope with prices going up and down a bit without it plunging them into, darkness and cold and being hungry. And that is about tackling things like high housing costs and rents. It's about energy efficiency in our homes to keep our energy bills down. It's about better quality jobs, better paid, secure jobs that give you that ability to cope with things. And of course, we had the Chancellor last autumn cut the rate of social security for those not able to work. So disabled people, carers, parents with very young children. Those benefits were cut massively last autumn. It is many of those people who are going to be facing the greatest hardship now. And we need a real conversation about what do we think it is acceptable for people to have to suffer in our society if they're not able to go out and get one of these jobs. And I think that's a long-term conversation we need to have. It's finding space for it in amongst all of the kind of political shenanigans, which are sucking up the oxygen.
It's 18 minutes past 1. This is On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. Whether you're watching on television or listening on radio, after the break, we'll keep this discussion going with the Tory MP, Scott Benson, Blackpool South member, with the Deputy Director of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, Helen Barnard, and our friend of the show, On the Money regular, Victoria Scholar, here in the studio with me. Your emails flooding in thick and fast. We'll read out some of those shortly. Stay with us. You're On the Money.
Hello again. Another dry day for the vast majority today. A mixture of cloud, sunshine, with some places staying misty with fog, and it's not dry everywhere. We do have some rain across Northern Ireland and Western Scotland, courtesy of this weather front. But it's bumping up against an area of high pressure, so it will be weakening as it crosses into Western Scotland. But it's bringing some wet weather through the morning and into the early afternoon across Northern Ireland for sure, and it will turn damp in Western Scotland during the afternoon. Elsewhere, most places dry, plenty of sunshine over northern England, parts of North Wales, East Anglia too, but there is patchy cloud across the south, and some places not really getting rid of the overnight fog, staying quite misty and murky, and if that happens, temperatures are really going to struggle. But with some sunshine, we should see temperatures generally close to average, 7 to maybe 10 Celsius. We'll see a bit more of that patchy rain just crossing through the central belt of Scotland this evening, and then it stays fairly wet over the Highlands, Western Isles and the Northern Isles overnight. Some patchy rain, perhaps at times drifting into Northern England, and things turn damp later in the night through the early hours across Northern Ireland. It'll be a milder night, particularly so across the north, but even further south you could see some patchy fog and maybe a little bit of frost in rural areas, but generally temperatures holding up. More cloud then on Wednesday, certainly for Northern England initially, and across the Midlands and Wales, a bit of rain early in the morning. That moves southwards and it'll bring the odd spot of rain across East Anglia and the southeast. As that clears through, brighter but colder weather will arrive, but temperatures through the day should still, at least for a time, get up to double figures across the south. But colder air is arriving in the far north. Some wintry showers likely over the Northern Isles and the northeast of the mainland. Could turn icy here on Wednesday night as temperatures start to plummet, and we will keep clear skies for many, so that will allow those temperatures to fall for Thursday morning. A cold day then on Thursday. Some snow showers across parts of eastern England are possible, but for most a dry and a bright day, turning cloudier but staying on the cold side into the weekend.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 1:23 and you're on the money. Now, as wages rise, but not as fast as inflation, we're talking about the squeeze on living standards. And today we're asking, how should the government tackle our cost of living crisis? Well, my expert panel is still with me. Let's turn firstly to Victoria Scholar here in the studio. Victoria, I know you spend a lot of your time looking at commodity markets, oil and gas wholesale prices, the prices that feed into and set the context for this cost of living crisis we're talking about ahead of these increases in domestic utility bills coming in April. How high could oil and wholesale gas prices go? Isn't it a spike, or are we looking at sustained high levels?
I think the sense is that this is a problem that's going to endure for longer than we previously thought. Last summer, we were having this discussion about inflation. Is it temporary, or is it going to be more of a permanent feature? And it feels as though the latter is winning. And it's the same situation with oil and gas. From some of the Wall Street giants, we've heard some really bullish calls on the oil market. Goldman Sachs is forecasting $100 oil. We're currently at around 85. JP Morgan pointing to $150 oil by 2023.
Yeah, it's often because they've got lots of oil, though, isn't it? I mean, I'm not saying those two banks, but often banks will put a thing out and anyway, carry on.
No comment. But, it's not just about oil, it's about gas as well. And there's been so much talk about this price cap increase in April. What's been less discussed is a potential further price cap increase in October.
Indeed,
so it does really
coming down the track.
It does really feel as though these commodity inflationary pressures that we're seeing are certainly not temporary. They're likely to be more sustained. And that's why, measures that are being discussed, such as the cost deferral mechanism, which is a way for the government to try and smooth some of these price increases, could be taken with a bit of caution, because we don't know how long these price increases are going to last. They want to try and smooth them over 5 to 10 years rather than seeing this huge hike in April. But what if prices continue to go up from there?
Indeed. Let's go back to you, Scott. You're not a member of the government, of course, but we know that Kwasi Kwarteng, the Energy Secretary, as Victoria Scholar was just alluding to there, is talking to the energy companies. We know 25 or so energy companies have already gone bust because wholesale prices that they must pay are much higher than the retail prices that they're allowed to charge households. There's a scheme that Kwasi Kwarteng's talking to energy providers about, lending them money to smooth out their financial difficulties, as Victoria Scholar says. Do you think that will fly? Do you think that will help your hard-pressed constituents?
Well, firstly, I think we have to be honest with people. Nobody knows how long higher inflation is going to persist. And we do need a national conversation and to be frank, to be honest with people, that they very may well be spending more on energy, on food for the foreseeable future. There's only so much government can do. Of course, I'm on the record in supporting both scrapping VAT on energy bills and the so-called green levies. I think the government will no doubt come out with a targeted support package for low-income households going forward as well. But this is a very different Conservative government, certainly to the one we've seen in the 1980s and 90s, for example. And we have on a number of occasions, whether it be, for example, with the steel markets, we have actually interfered or looked at the markets to see how they are functioning, to see if we can help people in certain situations. So I think it's inevitable that the Business Secretary and the Prime Minister will once again look to intervene in the market to protect consumers. That's certainly something I would support. I think it's quite unusual for a Conservative government to be doing that, but I think that shows how importantly we are taking the cost of living crisis and how much we appreciate that it's going to have a significant impact on people's budgets going forward.
and indeed on the elections, the local elections in May, which may make or break, in the view of some political pundits, the Prime Minister's reputation. Helen Barnard of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation is with us. Helen, I guess the reason we've focused on the VAT on fuel bills here on the money is because we don't believe that between now and April, the government, Boris Johnson in particular, is going to retreat away from those green levies, which make up 20-25% of people's fuel bills at the moment, albeit lots of Tory backbenchers like Scott Benson want that to happen. If you had 5 minutes with the Prime Minister, though, what are the issues, what are the things that you really think the Joseph Rowntree Foundation wants in order to ease the burden of this cost of living crisis, particularly on our lower income and more vulnerable households here in the UK?
So I think the best thing to do would be to put a cash grant through universal credit and the old style benefits some people are still on, because that is a system where all the finding the right people bit has already been done. You know, the system is set up to know what people need. So it would be very straightforward to put extra money through that system, which was set up, designed by a Conservative government, Conservative-led government, to help people in the immediate front term. I think there are things like moving the green levies actually onto general taxation. So I think there is a good argument to say one of the ways in the long term we reduce our exposure to these very volatile prices is by going further and faster to diversify where we're getting our energy from. But actually putting that money onto energy bills isn't a very good way of paying for it. It's not particularly progressive. So actually put that onto general taxation, which is what I think a lot of people are now asking. And you can achieve the outcomes we want for the country without hammering people who are struggling to pay to keep the lights on and the heating on. But I think the most important thing is get that money to people on low incomes, and you already have the tool to do it. And announce it quickly. The other thing I've been thinking is how much anxiety people are facing at the moment, having no idea how they're going to cope in April. And that is incredibly bad for mental health. So I think that actually saying very quickly, we're going to do this and here's when you'll get it, would put a lot of people's minds at ease and just ease that pressure of constant anxiety.
Barnard, you're on the money. I agree with nearly all of that, particularly if we are going to have upfront costs for a move to net zero. Don't put it on fuel bills, because fuel bills hit the poorest households hardest as a proportion of their income. Put it on general taxation. Be open and honest about it. Victoria Scholar, the final word to you. You're not going to like me for this. The inflation number comes out tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. We had 5.1% inflation in November. That's the latest number. What's the December number going to be?
Such a mean question.
No, I'm sorry.
Well, I think we're heading somewhere up towards 6% in the coming months. And
I agree with you.
Given the decision that we saw from the Bank of England, clearly they're very, very worried about inflation. That's why we saw that interest rate hike, which was quite a surprise to the markets and to all of us in December. So I think it's somewhere around 5%.
Should have watched On the Money. We predicted it.
Maybe just north of that.
So you think we could see even higher than 5.1 in December and even higher than that when the numbers come out for January and February? It's certainly the Bank of England even has acknowledged we could top 6% this year, right?
That is the expectation. If we look over to the US, we saw 7% inflation, 40-year highs in its latest inflation reading. We might not get quite as high as that, but it does look as though we are going to come up before we see prices move lower somewhere in the back end of this year.
And of course, we're talking the consumer price index, the old retail price index, which many people say is a better indication of living standards, already above 7% here in the UK.
Yeah, so the consumer prices index is what we look at as our basket of goods, as a gauge of what we actually purchase. And that's the one that dictates our inflation measures and indeed interest rate policy. But we can also look at RPI, which was a previous measure that the Bank of England used to look at, and PPI, which is about input costs.
Yes, right.
And
producer price indices.
Producer prices. So it's good to look at them all as a whole to get a sense of the whole overall position of the economy.
And tomorrow here on The Money, we will be examining all those measures. Great to have you back in the studio, Victoria Scholar of Interactive Investor. And thank you, Helen Barnard of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and of course, Scott Benson, Tory MP for Blackpool South. This is On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. It's 1:32. Coming up, Today's Money Talks interview is with the award-winning financial journalist, Iona Bain. Hailed as the UK's go-to voice on millennial money, Iona will be talking about the main financial issues affecting young people today. Stay with us for that. You won't want to miss it. But first, it's the GB News headlines with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon, it's 1:33. I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date here on GB News. The British gunman who took 4 people hostage at a synagogue in Texas was known to MI5. Malik Faisal Akram from Blackburn in Lancashire was investigated in 2020 and was assessed to no longer be a threat at the time he travelled to the United States. He was shot and killed after a 10-hour standoff with police and SWAT officers. No one else was injured. Boris Johnson has denied lying to Parliament, insisting he believed a gathering in Number 10's garden during lockdown was a work event. His former chief advisor, Dominic Cummings, says he's prepared to swear under oath that the Prime Minister did lie to MPs when he said he didn't know beforehand about the garden party in May 2020. Huge crowds have gathered for the funeral of the primary school teacher Aisling Murphy in County Offaly in Ireland. Her pupils lined the streets holding instruments and photos. The Irish Taoiseach Micheál Martin and the President, Michael D. Higgins, are both in attendance. The 23-year-old was killed whilst running along the Grand Canal in Tullamore. A New Zealand Navy ship has departed for Tonga with aid on board. It's after an underwater volcano erupted and triggered a 10-metre tsunami on Saturday. New Zealand's military was unable to fly essential supplies to Tonga as its airport runway is currently covered in thick ash. British number 1 star Emma Raducanu has won her first round Australian Open match in 3 sets. The 19-year-old tennis star beat America's Sloane Stephens and fought back from losing the second set 6-2 to win the third set. You're up to date here on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB Plus radio. There'll be a short break and then we're back to Liam and On the Money.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 1:37 and you are on the money. Now, businesses across the UK have faced many challenges during lockdown, of course, but the government stepped in to help the retail sector by putting in place temporary legislation stopping landlords evicting business tenants over a lack of rent. That legislation, though, is set to end in 2 months' time. And our Northern Ireland reporter, Doogie Beattie, has been finding out the impact of this on the high street in his area.
High streets throughout the UK have faced a once-in-a-lifetime financial shock, and legislation to protect it from the worst is coming to an end. The scheme that stopped businesses being evicted from rent arrears ends on March 25th.
Many businesses were closed, they were racking up significant debt, it was very difficult for them to pay rent. It's crucially important now that this scheme is coming to an end, that they're talking, working out a deal, and primarily which enables both to move forward, because we forget that landlords are business owners themselves and they need to be able to viably run their business. Likewise for many retailers, they need to make sure that they can get a deal on rent that helps them move forward. So it's about both sides talking to each other.
The problems for business don't stop there, and the road ahead is not without its challenges.
Well, it's going to be a very tough year for many of those businesses, because let's not forget, we will be paying rates again later on this year. You know, that will mean some businesses will not have paid rates for over 2.5 years. You have other cost issues coming down the pipeline, national insurance increases, national living wage, ongoing challenges with energy costs, and of course the problem with inflation. So there's almost a perfect storm of cost issues that are going to be facing businesses this year.
The cost of the pandemic is now only becoming clear. For city and shopping centres where the footfall is much greater, things can be sorted out much quicker. For regional towns such as this, it may take a lot longer. To avoid further legal costs and doubling up on administration, two of the devolved governments have taken an innovative approach.
Well, as I understand it, in England they're legislating for mandatory arbitration, whereas Northern Ireland and Scotland have decided not to go down that route. They're leaving it to businesses to decide if they want to go to arbitration or not in the case of any disputes. And it seems to us, certainly in Northern Ireland, that seems to be a good solution. Particularly here, we find that actually there aren't very many large landlords. Most of the landlords here are actually small businesses themselves, quite often with large businesses as their clients. So actually I think that the route we're going down is probably quite a sensible way of making sure we've got good, reasonable discussions going on between landlord and tenant.
Commerce always comes with risk, and with the upcoming elections and the ongoing pandemic, can our high streets actually recover?
I think there's a sense that we may just have turned the corner with coronavirus and people are learning how to live with it, and that we also have a lot of protection against it. So business is looking quite cautiously optimistic at the future, but against that backdrop we have to have political stability. Wherever we find it, here at Stormont or anywhere else in the UK, business always likes to have stability, because it's against that backdrop that it can then look to the future and invest.
Dougie Beattie, GB News on the high streets of Northern Ireland.
Dougie Beattie there in Northern Ireland. Now, On the Money regulars may recall that back in November, we covered the threat by tech giant Amazon to stop accepting Visa credit cards, they said, due to rising transaction fees. Some say Amazon were influenced by their close relations with MasterCard. Anyway, 2 months later, the online retail giant has dropped plans to block Visa's credit card payments from January the 19th. But has the damage already been done? With such a late announcement, numbers of Amazon customers may already have switched their preferred payment method. Joining me to talk about this is a payments and banking consultant. It's Bob Liddon. Bob, thanks a lot for joining me here on The Money. Great to have you on the show. What do you think is behind Amazon's thinking to threaten to block payments by Visa and then changing their mind literally at the last minute?
Yes, well, of course, they don't get the full proceeds of the sale by a long chalk. You know, both Visa and MasterCard payments and PayPal, the merchant can be short anything up to 5% of the face value of the payment. And Amazon want to challenge that. I mean, the British Retail Consortium have been trying to challenge that and get the payment systems regulator to do something about these fees. But at the end of it, I think Amazon have suffered a major defeat, because they are bound by one of the practices in the cards world, which is called honour all cards. If you accept any type of Visa card or any type of MasterCard, you've got to accept all of them, and you can't differentiate between Visa Debit, Electron, MasterCard Premium, or whatever. You've got to take all of them or none of them, and Amazon are contractually bound to that.
Interesting that a kind of pre-digital technology like the credit card companies are muscling up against the tech giants like Amazon, Bob. But to what extent do you think Amazon were influenced, they would deny this, of course, were influenced by the fact that MasterCard is a partner of Amazon, whereas Visa are not?
I wouldn't think, well, I mean, it's difficult. The trouble is the card industry, it's very opaque. You don't actually get to know what percentage of the face value Amazon received on this card or that type of card. And there are all these rebates and division of monies behind the scenes. I think it would be very surprising if that played a big influence because so many people use Visa. Here, it remains the dominant debit card. I think they must have been worried that Visa users wouldn't understand that they could still use the Visa debit card even if they couldn't use the rather rarer Visa credit card. So to maintain their sales, really that has to overcome the reluctance to swallow these deductions.
And to what extent do you think, Bob, that people will have already changed their preferred payment method to something away from Visa credit cards? They were always going to be able to use Visa debit cards under Amazon's plan, as you know. But you know what it's like. You change your preferred payment, and then if you're a regular online shopper, and many of our viewers will be, you don't really think about your preferred payment method because it's literally there by default.
You just go with it.
So by saying they're going to do this and then not doing it, Amazon may yet have benefited by pushing business to MasterCard and away from Visa.
Well, I think they'd have to be very careful if this was seen as a kind of practice to feed a partner through which they get more money. I'd have thought it's more likely that people who had Visa debit card were changing to MasterCard, not realizing that the debit card would still be accepted because Visa, Master, there are so many different types of card, and the message that Visa debit card would still be accepted might have got lost. And you'd see people switching unnecessarily, even though their preferred card would still have been accepted, or just stopping buying. That might be a concern as well.
Indeed. Banking and payments consultant Bob Liddon, great to have you on GB News. Come back again soon. Good to talk to you. And talking about financial confusion and all these cards and all these difficulties, it's time now for my daily interview series. It's Money Talks. And today's guest is the musician turned financial journalist Iona Bain. Scottish-born Iona became first interested in finance when her gig earnings were stolen from her piggy bank in a burglary. She started her Young Money blog to help get back on her feet, but soon found an audience for helpful analysis of the financial problems facing millennials. The blog went on to be named Money Blog of the Year by Santander and celebrated its 10th anniversary in May last year. And Iona's written 2 books on budgeting and investment as well. She continues to provide financial advice for young adults. And here she is. It's today's Money Talks guest. It's Iona Bain. Good to see you, Iona. There was meant to be a little sting there saying Money Talks, but we missed it. That's fine. Great to see you.
Great to be here.
So tell me about you were a musician, you're a singer, you're a cellist, and you were making money out of that.
Well, not very much.
But then the not very much money that you made was in your piggy bank and then that was stolen. So you turned to finance. It's not a typical career track record, is it?
No, but actually you meet quite a lot of people in finance who have got an unconventional background.
Indeed.
And they do end up doing this. So I was working as a musician in my early 20s. I'm a classically trained musician. And I was doing these gigs in Glasgow with a singer and putting all my gig earnings in my piggy bank. I was getting cash in hand because I later found out that the bar that I was playing at was run by the Glasgow Mafia. So that's why I was getting the cash in hand.
There you go.
So I was
Maybe they did the burglary as well. The perfect business model. Pay her, then take money back from her.
I never made that connection before, Liam. You've solved it.
See, it's on the money. It's what we do. We join the dots.
Yeah, that's it. So, yeah, I put all my gig earnings in the piggy bank, and I thought I was being really smart and grown up. And in a way I was, but I came back one night and looked at my bedroom, realised it'd been burgled, and of course the piggy bank was gone because, burglars must have thought all their Christmases had come at once. And then having to give a description of the piggy bank to a police officer later that evening, And, you know...
You thought there must be a better way.
Yeah, I thought this is not good. I really need to get to grips with money. And so that helped me realise that actually maybe starting a blog might help me learn about money and also help other people along the way.
Now, let me ask you an open-ended question at the outset, Iona. It strikes me that the English, the Scots, the Welsh, all of us here in the British Isles as a whole, we're not very good at talking about money, are we? We think it's rude to talk about money. We're almost embarrassed to talk about money. And yet you're trying to get us to talk about money. I'm trying to get us to talk about money.
Yeah.
It's a tough call, isn't it?
It is a tough call. And when I first started my blog, lots of people said to me, young people don't care about money. And it was really frustrating because actually I found that young people were obsessed with money. It was a little bit like sex. They weren't having enough of it, and it was all that they could think about. So I thought to myself, well, actually, I am going to keep at this because I have a theory that young people are obsessed with money, and actually what they really need is more informed, sympathetic analysis of the financial problems that they were facing. But it was very difficult because I'd go and talk to editors, producers, and I would try to convince them that they needed to cover young people's financial issues. And they said, well, most of the people who read our newspapers and watch our programmes and listen to our programmes, they just care about their own finances, and young people, they're not interested in personal finance. And I thought, well, you know, you're never going to attract a younger audience if you have that attitude. And actually, Liam, as I'm sure you'll agree, parents care deeply about their children's financial prospects. They care more about that than their own situation because they know that young people are in a real fix today.
Let me tell you something else. In my experience, a lot of people who work in TV production make the kind of decisions you're talking about. Yeah. They're often from very affluent backgrounds. They don't worry about money because their parents have got tons of money. But, of course, most of us aren't in that position. And you're trying to help young people basically not get ripped off. Yeah. To be a little bit, as you say, north of the border, a little bit canny about how they manage their money. So what are some of the lessons that you would say to young people?
Well, the motto of the blog is don't get mad, get informed. Because I think the worst thing that you can do is give in to what I would call financial nihilism. Yeah. And that would be very easy.
They're all against me. It's the system.
Exactly. And I mean, you know, you've written extensively about the flaws in the housing market, and it can feel as if the odds are stacked against you as a young person.
Very much so.
And as you say, if you come from that more affluent background, you naturally have those advantages that will help you get on in life.
You can afford not to think about it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And your parents may also pass on what I call the knowledge. And the knowledge is just as powerful as having money, because the knowledge tells you how to kind of take advantage of all those tax-efficient products. It tells you how to budget well. It tells you, you know, the way to invest for the future so you can grow whatever you have. And that knowledge doesn't necessarily get passed on to all young people. And yes, financial education is in schools, but it's not being taught everywhere.
It's a bit patchy, isn't it?
It's very
patchy.
We've
covered that on the past here on the money.
So I think what I've learned is that, you know, you can't wait for other people to hand you that knowledge. You've got to go out and find it yourself. And to be fair, it is possible to do that today with the internet. You just have to learn which resources are trustworthy and which ones will actually give you the information that's in your interest.
And look for knowledge that is on the money, to coin a phrase, but it's also impartial, from people who aren't trying to sell you something, not trying to link their advice to a particular product. Try and find objective advice. I would say the business sections of our newspapers are full of really interesting financial advice. You know, the paper I write for, the Telegraph, but it's not just the Telegraph, of course, all the quality papers, and even the so-called tabloids and mid-market papers, full of decent financial advice. We're not qualified to give financial advice. We are speaking in the round and generally. But you talk about the knowledge, Iona, I completely agree with you, but it's also about the confidence. So where does a young woman without a formal training in finance, with all respect to you, you know, who's pretty good on the cello and has got a good voice, where did you get the confidence from to say, I can sort this out, I can think these things through, this isn't too complicated for me?
I'll be completely honest, I do think parents play a huge role here. And I've got to give some credit to my wonderful parents who are watching this, for sure. Hi, Mum and Dad. They gave me the confidence to start doing something that scared me to death. Because when I was at my lowest point and I wasn't earning very much as a musician anymore and I didn't know what to do with my life, I had a real crisis of confidence. And looking back now, I think I was quite depressed and anxious. And they said to me, well, Iona, you can write and you can talk.
And you've written Own It, which I was pleased to... You can hold that up there in front of the camera.
There we
which
go.
I was pleased to review when it came out. It's a very interesting book, very clear clearly written, which is key.
Well, I'm delighted to hear that, because that's exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to make it that friendly guide to the scary world of investment, and one that was independent as well. But I mean, it was my parents who helped me realise that actually, you know, anyone can learn about money if they've got the motivation, if they've got the time, and if they understand what resources are out there. Because I think one of the things that I find most frustrating is that young people don't know about even basic products that could help them. So, for instance, the Lifetime ISA, you know, that is a very helpful product for those who are saving for their first home.
Save without, and it's tax-free saving, and the government chucks in some money as well.
Up to £1,000 a year.
What's not to like? What's not to like? I think your generation in particular, Iona, do have it tougher than your parents' generation. Your generation finds it really difficult to rent or buy housing. It's a huge issue. All my GB News colleagues, lots of them are in their 20s, often asking me about how do I rent, how do I buy? It's impossible. It's so much harder for me than it was for my parents. I think it's really incumbent on your generation to fight back against these financial, in my view, iniquities. I don't think it's too strong a word.
No, I don't think that's too strong a word either. And I think I've always stressed through my blog that the solution cannot just be personal. It has to be institutional. It has to be political. Young people have to be engaged at that level, as well as motivated to look after their finances. And we've seen in recent times the government has really shied away from taking those tough decisions that would improve the housing market, even though I think that there will still be intractable problems with the housing market that will last many years. And we've seen governments of all stripes shirking those difficult decisions. And I just don't think the situation will improve so much in the near future that we can wait for that kind of help to come along. We've got to find a way to help ourselves.
Iona Bain, it's great to talk to you. Great to meet you finally in person. We've conversed over the months and years. Congratulations on your book.
Thank you.
And all the best to you. Thanks for being here on The Money.
Thank you.
Our latest Money Talks guest there, Iona Bain. And before we finish the show, a few thoughts from you on today's discussion on the cost of living and inflation. It's a subject which always gets you guys writing in and tweeting. GBviews at gbnews.uk, tweet at GBnews. Kenny emailed, surely if wages rise above inflation, that would mean higher inflation. Kenny, all I can say is it's complicated, but tomorrow's On The Money. We'll be talking all about inflation, because that inflation number comes out tomorrow on scrapping the VAT on fuel bills. Mac contacted us to say any government intervention should be aimed at those that really can't afford it. The user can contact the supplier, and the supplier can be partially reimbursed by the government if they meet the needs. It's not a bad idea. And Elizabeth says it's all very well to say don't cut the VAT, but target the help on those on lowest incomes. But not everyone in need is eligible for help, so any cut would be a help. Well, I absolutely agree with you, Elizabeth, on that. It's people who aren't quite eligible for benefits. They're just outside that most vulnerable and lowest income bracket who are really going to get whacked. Keep your emails coming about rising energy bills, about the cost of living crisis, and anything else. Back our Scrap the VAT campaign. There it is. We were looking for that earlier. That's all we've got time for on today's show. Thanks for joining me. We'll be back for more economics, business and consumer news at 1 p.m. tomorrow on GB News television and on radio. This is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan, and that was On The Money.
Hello again. Another dry day for the vast majority today. A mixture of cloud, sunshine, with some places staying misty with fog, and it's not dry everywhere. We do have some rain across Northern Ireland and Western Scotland, courtesy of this weather front. But it's bumping up against an area of high pressure, so it will be weakening as it crosses into Western Scotland. But it's bringing some wet weather through the morning and into the early afternoon across Northern Ireland for sure, and it will turn damp in Western Scotland during the afternoon. Elsewhere, most places dry, plenty of sunshine over northern England, parts of North Wales, East Anglia too, but there is patchy cloud across the south, and some places not really getting rid of the overnight fog, staying quite misty and murky, and if that happens, temperatures are really going to struggle. But with some sunshine, we should see temperatures generally close to average, 7 to maybe 10 Celsius. We'll see a bit more of that patchy rain just crossing through the central belt of Scotland this evening, and then it stays fairly wet over the Highlands, Western Isles and the Northern Isles overnight. Some patchy rain, perhaps at times drifting into northern England, and things turn damp later in the night through the early hours across Northern Ireland. It'll be a milder night, particularly so across the north, but even further south, you could see some patchy fog and maybe a little bit of frost in rural areas, but generally temperatures holding up. More cloud then on Wednesday, certainly for northern England initially and across the Midlands and Wales. A bit of rain early in the morning. That moves southwards and it'll bring the odd spot of rain across East Anglia and the southeast. As that clears through, brighter but colder weather will arrive. But temperatures through the day should still, at least for a time, get up to double figures across the south. But colder air is arriving in the far north. Some wintry showers likely over the Northern Isles and the northeast of the mainlands. Could turn icy here on Wednesday night as temperatures start to plummet. And we will keep clear skies for many, so that will allow those temperatures to fall for Thursday morning. A cold day then on Thursday. Some snow showers across parts of eastern England are possible, but for most a dry and a bright day, turning cloudier but staying on the cold side into the weekend.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farrar, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, a show that looks at the news of the day through the focus of a female